Moth News Live. Just want to tell you, first of all, we will be live again tomorrow with stories of the week and probably some of this and conversation around this particular interview. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. It's a new time. We're usually on at 3 p.m. on a Friday, and we decided to make the change to see if we 3 o'clock on a Friday. Sure, most people are checked out. It's the weekend already. Anyway, so we're on live at 11 a.m. tomorrow, the usual channels. Now, please, I would encourage everybody to watch this. This is essential viewing. I mean, you'll probably think, yeah, of course he's going to say that. Of course he's going to say he wants everyone to watch this. If you think you know what the problem is with Ireland, you're wrong. For most people, if you think it's immigration, people coming to this country looking for asylum, if you think it's, I mean, even in a way, if you think it's your local TD or your local council or whatever you think about how things are done, this will make you think again. The interview was set up, and this is an interview about a VAT fraud scandal situation that was happening in the poultry section. And that's what I was going to talk to him about. But it became about much more than that, because the poultry section, the chicken farming section, is sort of like a microcosm or a very small version of how the country is run. And you'll see that if you watch the whole interview. Now, it's quite long, but it's worth it. I mean, we don't necessarily, I mean, there's a few, I think you'll see during it, I had my mind blown. And yeah, so I started off talking about chicken farms, but effectively he told me about how a system of government was brought into place in 1987 by Charles Haughey, working closely with top civil servants, and it's remained that way ever since. And it's probably not what you think it is, where a normal democracy you'd vote for your TD and then he makes the decisions. It seems that it's a different system, that we don't have the system we think we have. I don't know why. It doesn't seem to be working for the regular citizen of the country. It's obviously working for some people. Anyway, please watch this. Please tell your friends to watch this. Please get your children to watch this. I think I just did the interview, so I think I'm still in a bit of shock. Probably need to go lie down. Have a watch, and if you have any comments, please do get in touch. We're on X, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. This will be available to watch on our YouTube channels, on X later, tomorrow. And don't forget, we will be live at 11 a.m. from the studio tomorrow. And we'll be talking about this again, for sure. Okay, here we go. Hello and welcome to Moth News Live. My guest today is Raymond O'Hanlon, former managing director of Cappoquin Poultry, Cappoquin Chicken actually, who says he watched his business collapse because he refused to stay silent about VAT fraud in Ireland's poultry sector. He is now taking on the state in court, and this is his story. Very interesting story. You're very welcome, Raymond. That information I gave at the top of the show correct?
At the time when Cappoquin was closed down, I was actually unaware of the existence of VAT fraud.
Okay, right. Okay.
I was closed down by various state actors, including Enterprise Ireland, the Department of Agriculture and Board BIA. I was unaware of the involvement of revenue at the time. It was only years later, several years later, after I had met Alo Mohan and had worked with him on VAT, that I decided, wow, I better go back and check my records and see if there's anything there from Cappoquin days with respect to VAT. And I'd saved a lot of files from 2012, 2013, when the plant was closed down. And going back through my spreadsheets, I went through all of the payments of growers, and I looked at these spreadsheets and the formulas they contained, and I began to realize there's something here. This doesn't look right, because one of the formulas I could see just increased the price of feed automatically in the formula by 200 euros a ton, and by 100 euros a ton. And that was part of the whole VAT scam, which I had reviewed with Alo Mohan. So it took me about 8 weeks to decipher the formulas in the spreadsheet, but I actually have the spreadsheets which were used to commit fraud. Only the price of feed and the way they manage the feed in Cappoquin actually ruled me out of the fraud. I didn't receive the rebate that I would have received had I been participating in fraud. So I was paying at the time about 195 euros a ton more for my feed than my competitors were. Okay. And I wasn't getting any benefit in terms of fraud. It was just, it was manipulation of the scheme to make sure I was unaware of it. While sitting on the systems of fraud, I remained totally unaware, and I was being strangled. It was only afterwards, if I hadn't met Alo Mohan, I would have never worked out the systems. I wouldn't even have looked at them. But I actually have in my possession the different systems of VAT fraud which were rolled out in the poultry sector. And my system, the one in Cappoquin, was reportedly implemented by the IFA, having brought it down from Carton Brothers. So that's what I have sitting there.
So you'll have to explain this to me in layman's terms, okay? And I'm going to be the everyman. I'm going to ask the questions of the person, because this is very similar to some other things we're looking at that with regards to Enterprise Ireland, financing startups, being involved in startups, gambling with taxpayers' money that people just aren't aware of, because people are looking at, people are looking at healthcare, people are looking at transport, housing. Of course, they're just not aware of the farming sector. This whole VAT thing wouldn't be on people's radars, unless you're very much involved in it on either side. Either you're committing the fraud, or you're aware of the fraud and you're trying to bring this to the attention, or or you're losing your business because you're not willing to get involved in the scam. So tell me about the business closing down and what you thought the reason was that the business closed down when Cappoquin Chickens went out of business with you at the helm.
I bought into the business along with a partner, teamed up with growers from Cappoquin, and we acquired the business out of examinership. So we had this plan put together which required funding from Enterprise Ireland, and we were going to be able to turn the business around, because my background is in turnaround consultancy. I spent years and years working with very sick companies, turning them around, getting them on their feet again, and handing them back. So that's the kind of stuff I do. It wasn't new to me. It wasn't shocking to me. We put a plan together, and it was approved by Enterprise Ireland. We put it together with the involvement of an Enterprise Ireland manager for the area, and we were supposed to get funding from Enterprise Ireland. But as things turned out, a U-turn was done by Enterprise Ireland, and we didn't receive the funding at the outset, which was required. It was blocked by the Department of Agriculture, and we needed to have funds from the very start, but we didn't get those funds. But we kept going. We managed to make cost savings. We had predicted that we understood we were losing about 15,000, 20,000 a week at the start, which was, we were okay with that. We could manage that. We could see how that could be done. But then we didn't get the funding. That became problematic. But what was even more problematic is we weren't losing 20,000, we were losing 100,000 once we took over, because the VAT funding was pulled from one day to the next. So over the period of about 6 weeks, we managed to slash the losses, and we got it back down to under 50,000 a week being lost. And still we couldn't get funding from Enterprise Ireland. Still we tried to survive. Then eventually Enterprise Ireland, at a meeting where it was left very little option but to back it, they did give us 500,000 of funding, which would keep us going for 6 weeks. Now, their little 6-week plan didn't work out either, because we had other plans to develop new markets and various things in place. And once we got the go ahead, we activated those plans, and about in the following month or so, we broke even on our operations. So we had a dramatic turnaround with almost no funding from them. Like, the money they put in was almost irrelevant, because the hole was bigger than the 500,000 gave. They created a hole bigger than what they ended up filling. So then when we began to grow our markets and grow our volumes, we went from about 27,000 chickens a week in the beginning. We went up every single week over 12 weeks, and we were up to 85,000 chickens per week in the Irish market. Now, we weren't supposed to be in the Irish market, as it turns out. We were supposed to be export. Enterprise Ireland, with the previous version of the organisation, had backed a halal plant in the export market. So it wasn't competing with the indigenous industry, with the indigenous companies. But we developed where the margins were, which was in the Irish market, and that wasn't acceptable. And when we managed to keep growing, we began to experience lots of other attacks. We had forklifts, specialized forklifts with the electronics, the dashboards destroyed. We had rotten chicken put into packs. Various things were happening. Our switching gear, bringing in the electricity from the high voltage electricity into the plant, they somehow just blew up and fried our systems. We had all sorts of issues there. We had sand in diesel tanks. It was just one thing after another. But what ultimately got us was that we had to import chicken to supplement the chickens which were dwindling on the farms, because we hadn't the finance, we hadn't the money to pay for the old chicks. So to keep going, we brought in chicken from outside, and as long as we could make a margin on that, we could still keep going and we could rebuild. So that was our plan. But then what really got us was we got on the long weekend in May, I think it's May, in 2013, we received our Arctic load of chicken in for the long weekend from Holland. And when we opened the doors, the chicken was turquoise. It was visibly rotten. Now, it improved as it went back through the truck, which just simply told us that the doors had been left open in the heat, and it had rotten from the boom end inwards. That had a very damaging impact on us at that time. So we began to lose market again. And we still managed to keep going to set up investors to come in with us. We'd been trying to get investment in since Enterprise Ireland did the U-turn, but we were well advanced with 2 possibilities. But again, those possibilities were undermined, and collapsed by grower representatives, and eventually the plant just folded. It was the last straw. We were just hit with, it was like fighting an intense battle from the day we took over on the 3rd of December 2012 to the day we closed in August 2013.
So you had, how long did you have, how long was it? A year? Not even a year?
It wasn't a year. I suppose I was a year involved in total because we participated in the examinership and all that side, putting plans together, etc. But we were running the company only for about 9 months.
Do you think, so you were being sabotaged?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, we didn't know it at the time, but that went back to a plan which was developed actually by Enterprise Ireland and approved by various stakeholders. It was the first of the 10-year plans for the agricultural sector called Agri-Food 2010. And in that document, it calls for a reduction of poultry plants from 23 down to 7. When Cappoquin closed, it was the number had reached 7. Okay, so we were the last one to be taken out. So the way that it was taken out was through VAT fraud. Well, there were different mechanisms, but the primary mechanism was VAT fraud. If you were a select processor or a designated processor, you engaged in fraud and you received the funding, claiming back VAT from revenue. If you were to be taken out, they call them GORE processors, then you didn't receive the benefit of the funding. What you received was an increase in feed prices. So what happened was that in the companies that were to survive, called the stayer processors, they received VAT funding. The ones to be taken out didn't. The ones who were to be taken out went bust because they couldn't compete with the ones who received funding. Quite simple. So the whole sector was brought back to the magic number of 7. And obviously we were quite unaware of that. Again, it was several years after we were closed. Obviously I knew that Enterprise Ireland and the Department of Agriculture and Board BIA had been involved in closing us down, and some of our grower partners. But we couldn't really put the case together. We couldn't understand why this would make any sense. But I knew enough to actually gather the evidence, to classify it, to fill boxes of it, and to leave it to one side. And it was then years later when I read an article in the paper mentioning Marion Harkin and MEP Marion Harkin and a chicken grower, that I read the Sunday Times, and I sent an email to Marion Harkin immediately afterwards asking for a catch up with her. She then introduced me to Alo Mohan, and we immediately began to understand there's something wrong here. So as it turned out, it was all the one VAT fraud system. Alo was the grower side, and I was the processor side. And we began to piece it together. I had to piece it together with Alo first to understand how the scams work, to realize that there were scams, and then understand how they work. And then after that, I went back into the Cappoquin side, and I had all the stuff I could actually understand. I knew enough from Alo to actually understand the systems that were there.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like when you took over this business, like a little bit of funding, you had a great business plan. Even as you were being sabotaged, you were still making it work. And you only eventually went out of business because somebody sabotaged a load of poultry that was destined, that was coming for you. Why weren't you? So I presume they allowed you to do the takeover for, because it would, for aesthetic purposes. Just go along with it. But this is going to fail. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Why weren't you chosen, and who were the 7 chosen to survive out of the 20 whatever companies?
Yeah, why weren't we chosen? Well, Cappoquin was taken out actually previously. MD O'Connor was closed down. Yeah. But after the liquidation of MD O'Connor, the plant was bought out in liquidation by a group that were investing in the plant to produce halal chicken and to export it all. So that caused the plant to be, or to allow it to reopen. And it got its license and continued on, supposedly moving solely into export. Now, they didn't proceed with that plan fully. They still continued in the Irish market, which obviously was upsetting. So steps were taken then to close it down again. And part of that was increasing the feed price once again, but not transferring the benefit to the owners of the business. Okay, so in our case, then it's very clear from the evidence that the plan was that we would be purchased out of liquidation. Only this time, the Department of Agriculture would carry out an inspection. It would find all of these improvements that needed to be made. One of them was the replacement of the asbestos roof, which was estimated to be cost about €1 million. So there were these various items which would have made it impossible for the plant to be reopened, and a license wouldn't be issued. Okay? So the plant would be closed. But as it turned out, we bought the plant out of examinership. So the plant had a license and the plant could continue. So the simple plan of simply pulling the license, or sorry, not renew the license, that didn't work anymore. And so they were in a completely new ballgame. So they had to come up with other ways of pulling us out of business. Yeah. So it was just one thing after another.
But why? But I don't. I still. So basically, 7 businesses were basically being state funded. So basically, you're talking about a market that just wasn't fair. They're allowing people to buy into business, spend their hard-earned money and time and all that to develop businesses without knowing the facts. The fact that the market was already fixed and that their competitors were being funded by the state effectively through this. They were saying you just claim as much VAT as you want, and that's our way of funding you, and we won't give them the funding. Who were the 7, and why were they picked? I don't understand how they did that.
I'll talk about the chicken sector. In the chicken sector, you had 8 of the plants out of 23 were involved in chicken processing. Oh, sorry, 8 of the plants out of the 23 were chicken processors. Okay. So the plan there was to bring them back to 3. So they needed to close down 5. So 5 were closed down. Yeah, and the remaining plants you got Carton Brothers, Shannon Vale, and Western Brand.
They were the ones picked to survive.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it was based actually on a plan developed by Enterprise Ireland. Specifically, the gentleman who told me that he was responsible was a Mr. Joe Fox, the DA who worked with us on the plan for Cappoquin.
Yeah. And it was just that they were deemed to be the best chicken producers in the country and the best.
Well, if you look at it, I suppose you have most of the production there is in the Cavan Monaghan area. And my understanding is that they were disadvantaged areas which attracted more funding from the EU rather than, let's say, Cappoquin plant down in the tillage area of Waterford. Okay. So Cappoquin, while in theory, or should have been top of the list because you could actually use the poultry litter on tillage, it was chosen to be closed down, and the production was kept in Cavan Monaghan and in Clonakilty down in Cork.
So Cappoquin was being closed down because it wasn't going to get the funding by the EU or whatever this.
Because it wasn't going, and for those reasons, it wasn't going to get the funding from the Irish state.
Okay, so the first, I mean, you're being sabotaged. So they wanted you to close down. You're going to come hell or high water, no matter what you did, no matter how brilliant you were at your job.
Yeah.
This is going to be closed down.
Yep.
Who was physically in person being hired to put sand in diesel engines, to break windows, to ruin stock? Like, who was calling those shots, and on whose behalf?
Well,
do you know?
Let's put it this way. I laid off, I think it was probably about 5 individuals in the plant based on our inability to continue paying all the staff, etc. But I would have carefully chosen targets to remove people I've been observing who I believed were probably involved. And I can tell you that after I removed a number of gentlemen for different areas, those sort of acts stopped against us in the plant. We had equipment being wrecked, being destroyed. We were working weekends that we couldn't afford to fix equipment. Various things were happening, and I believed I had a very good idea who the individuals inside the plant were, and I moved them on. Afterwards, then the sabotaging of the product started. Yeah. So that's when rotten, out-of-date chicken began to be put into packs, along with fresh chicken. And when I actually went to the UK and hired in a new operations manager who would work with me to actually run the plant out of stock every day, to avoid people being able to have old stock to put into packages. So we completely changed the way we handled stock and the way we handled production to undermine people being able to sabotage the product in the plant. And so that did improve the situation on that front. But then when they couldn't readily get stuff into the packs in the plant, that's when we got our Arctic load of rotten chicken from Holland. So it just shows you the progression. It didn't really matter that we stopped them in the plant because they just moved outside. We then controlled that and they moved on to the other piece. They blew up our switching gear to begin with. Now, we can't prove that. But when you look at all the coincidences, there were just such an incredible number of coincidences in Cappoquin, all of them very damaging to the business. Yeah.
So when you're looking at all, when you're going back and you've spoken to Alo, and then you're realizing that this is something. I mean, you knew something was off. You knew you were up against it, I presume, at the time, but you didn't know exactly why. So then you spoke. You did know what. You didn't.
How would we believe that somebody was? How would we believe that the state was working against us to put us out of business? How would we believe that Enterprise Ireland, who's responsible for job creation and for doing all these wonderful things in the country, how would we believe that they were behind the development of a plan to rationalise the industry, and that revenue would fund certain processors against other ones based on the strategic plan? You know, how does one begin to put that together at a time when you're losing 100 grand a week? When you're losing 100 grand a week, it focuses the mind, and you really, you're just full on working on the day to day to bring your costs down, to stop doing things that are losing you money. Like this, it's a very serious situation. But every week we brought down our costs. We managed. Well, that's what I did for a living before. So
you were seeing the cost, but you were like, okay, we need automatic lights, we need this, we need to less toilet paper, whatever it was.
We stopped producing cooked product and various things like that were obviously loss making. Now, one of the areas that we did want to attack from the very beginning was the awful recovery. The hearts, the kidneys, the feet, whatever else. Because all of that stuff was being put into a skip. So not alone were we losing the benefit of the sales, we were paying for the skip to be taken away, for the stuff to be rendered. So we needed to get that piece up and running from the beginning. We reckoned there were about 6,000 euros a week to be gained from sales of those.
Selling the offal, yeah.
So even before we opened up, just 2 or 3 days before we opened up, we had a Department of Agriculture inspection which closed down the offal recovery room. Yeah. So we were required to invest over 20,000 euro into that area, which of course we didn't have in order to be able to open it up again. Yeah. So they were the types of things we were dealing with every day.
So you're talking about, on the VAT fraud front, you're talking about revenue. Enterprise Ireland are involved because it's their plan to get the amount of chicken processing plants down from 8 to 3. So it's their big plan, and then you've got inspectors involved on behalf of. Do they work for the Department of Agriculture? Yeah. So you got inspectors involved, and they're. I mean, were they? Oh, well, what were the reasons they closed the offal area down? Was it? Did you believe it? Were you like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's probably fair enough.
I have actually written down, but it was a smell that a stale smell was what the gentleman detected. So that meant it wasn't just that you could power hose it down and do whatever. It was a stale smell, and
a stale smell. Then obviously he could say, well, that's what I'm smelling. So nobody could argue with somebody saying I'm getting a stale smell. It's not like he didn't need to have evidence, physical evidence.
No, we couldn't bottle it. No, it was whatever the man said was true, was right. Might as well be. You had to adhere to it.
There was no way of arguing with it.
Yeah.
But what? So if you're a chicken farmer in 2012, it's not a free market. You're up against what effectively seems like some sort of mobster, gangster, mafia type situation where there's a plan in place. These businesses are getting are being given the market. You're going to be driven out of you won't know, but we're driving you out of business. And actually, it's all coming from your own government.
Yeah, it's the businesses are in private ownership, but they're under state control, and the so-called profits of these businesses, they're VAT. It's VAT funding. So essentially, yeah, they're private owned, but they're state owned. They're state controlled. Simple as that. If you get funding, you make profits.
Okay. So you're only making profits if you get funding. Is that what you're saying?
The VAT is what is the profit. You know, the fact they were claiming back the overclaiming of 1,000% VAT identified by revenue. What's happening there is the VAT is getting reclaimed by the processors. You see, the farmer sells a chicken. On the price of the chicken, you've got flat rate VAT. Okay, so what to do is they inflate the price of feed. So the processor sells feed to the farmer. They inflate the price of feed by, let's say, 200 euros a ton. To compensate the farmer, they then pay a higher price for the chicken. So the processor makes an extraordinary profit on the sale of the feed, which then gets wiped out in compensating the farmer for the price that they have to pay. Okay? But what you're left with after you've cancelled out one with the other is you're still left with the flat rate VAT on the sale. Okay? The VAT didn't disappear. The profit disappeared. But then the VAT generated on the sale of the chicken remains. And the processor then pays the farmer as per their agreement. The farmer can only sell to that processor, can only buy the feed from that processor, can only buy the day-old chicks from that processor, can only sell back to that processor. So it's a completely closed loop. But the processor ends up with the 1,000% overclaim of VAT. Okay? And then that VAT is what's used to compete in the sector, in the industry. Yeah? So VAT is where the profits from the sector come from. So in the aftermath of what Pascal Donoghue announced last week, withdrawing the poultry sector from the flat rate system, what you're now going to see is that feed prices in Ireland will magically reduce by about 200 euros per tonne. Okay? Now, they'd like to not do that because it would simply demonstrate the fraud that was in existence. But if they don't do that, they'll wipe out the industry. Okay? So feed prices will drop. I can tell you now, in this interview, I can tell you now, feed prices will drop in poultry by 200 euros a tonne on the 1st of September.
Can you tell me why any of this is happening? I don't understand. Like, who's benefiting, and why couldn't they just not let it be a free market and let the strongest survive? I don't understand. Is the chicken business in Ireland not viable?
The chicken business in Ireland isn't viable as it's currently configured. You see, if you look at the Cappoquin situation, we weren't viable when we lost the VAT funding. Yeah?
Yeah.
Once we took over, we knew nothing about VAT, we didn't get it. Okay? So when the VAT funding stopped for Cappoquin, it couldn't survive with that configuration. That's why I moved immediately. When I saw the situation we were in, I cut one thing after another and I brought it back into a configuration that could survive. Yeah? The industry would change dramatically. It would have to change dramatically and very quickly when the VAT is changed. But I don't believe that these good people are actually capable of changing in the way they need to change, because they will be wringing their hands and they'll be crying now for the next number of months. And people like Alo Mohan and myself and others will be blamed for being bad people and undermining the industry. And I don't see the moves being made by the people that need to make them on time to be able to save significant parts of the industry. We'll see how they go. Maybe they're a lot more clever and capable than I give them credit for.
But there's an opportunity for somebody to do it properly and to make.
Oh yeah, there's always a way of doing things differently. Like, people find ways of doing things differently all the time. Because if your choice is to survive, well, then you have to see what does it take to actually make this work. It'll be dramatically reconfigured, but parts of the industry can survive. But you see, Alo Mohan and myself made this point to the Finance Committee back a number of years ago in the Dáil. And we specifically told them that you can't bring in the change from one day to the next because you'll wipe out the sector. This is going to take a number of years to undo. We told them we would work constructively with them to look at the changes required so that it didn't collapse. And we did make the point, and I believe this should be on video, I presume they recorded us, but what we told them was that they needed to make the changes in a sequence in order for the industry to adapt over a period of time. They needed new markets, they needed new products, different things needed to happen here. But they did what we asked them and appealed to them not to do, which was they've now pulled out the sector overnight, and they haven't done any of the preparation for that.
No,
there's not time to adjust.
Why was it configured this way? And are we talking about, I'm wondering, are there, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I can't think why this would happen. So why was it configured like this? Are we talking about egos? People don't want it to fail because it was my idea? Or are we talking about people pocketing money that shouldn't be, and there's a whole cabal, or there's a whole network of people just I'm baffled. I don't understand it. I'm like, it sounds like the most ridiculous. Someone came up with a plan and just kept going, even though it wasn't.
No. This was a plan which has been in the making for decades.
But why?
Well, it was a plan brought in really by Charlie Haughey and Paul O'Higgins, his Secretary General of the Department of the Taoiseach.
Would he be a civil servant, this man?
Yes, 1987. was when this whole plan was eventually launched. Haughey made an attempt to bring it in previously, but he didn't survive to be able to do it at the time. But in
You're talking about
87,
a senior civil servant, basically.
they changed the whole model of government. Yeah, they changed from a democracy to corporate statism, whereby it's the state that controls everything, essentially. Mm-hmm.
And nobody really knows about this. We still think we're living in a
people know about this. People know about this, and people have written, I suppose, a number of theses and various things about it. But the problem is that the conclusions have never worked with reality. People, for whatever reason, don't call a spade a spade. It's just probably too big for people, because it just questions the whole way our democracy is run. Yeah, or lack thereof is run. Yeah. So essentially, before, where you had heads or where you had ministers over their departments working on their strategies and bringing their proposals to cabinet and getting them approved by a Taoiseach, instead what you have is an inner circle working with the secretaries of the department, pushing strategies out through ministers. So the strategies don't come up, the strategies go down.
The dog wagging the tail, tail wagging the dog, tail wagging the dog.
The state invested interest wagging the dog.
It's backwards.
Yep.
So our country has been run by people who aren't elected.
Yeah.
And the whole election thing is just, it doesn't matter who's there, because when you get into office, your civil servant who you're working with will tell you what's happening next.
That's right. Well, it goes deeper than that. You had the the social partnership was where a lot of the changes started off with, in the Haughey era, and grew and strengthened under Bertie Ahern and whoever. But supposedly partnership died in 2007, but in 2006, a law which I've never met anyone that ever heard of it was implemented, which essentially enshrined social partnership within the department of the Taoiseach. Yeah. So it never actually died, it just transformed and moved into a different era where it continues to contribute, let's say, to policy development. Yeah, which is under the control of the Taoiseach stroke Secretary General of the Department of the Taoiseach.
So this is across the board then. This is like, because as you're talking to me, I'm talking about other tech sectors, I'm talking about startups, I'm looking at Enterprise Ireland and their involvement in different areas. I'm going, there's a whole, like, what people are being elected.
I tried to restrict my focus to chickens. Okay, but I couldn't answer the questions doing that. So I began to look at a wider context. I began to look at agriculture. So I wouldn't attempt to speak about other sectors beyond agriculture.
Okay.
But in order to understand what had happened, I had to go back into national development plans, 10-year strategic plans, all sorts of different documentation. And bit by bit, working with my colleagues, we did piece it together. It took a good while to piece it together. I'd say it took about 10 years to piece it together. But at the end of the day, we did work out how the government of the country is structured. And it is not structured the way people believe it is.
Wow. I mean, this is like, this is bombshell stuff for me here right now as a
well, this is all contained in a statement of claim which we prepared for the bigger case. We, 6 of us, took against about 18 defendants back in 2018, including the Minister for Finance and Agriculture and Enterprise Ireland and Board BIA and the whole shooting gallery, really, because there was no point in taking on bits of it. One had to take on the overall model. And that model has been described and is contained in our statement of claim for that larger case.
if we go back to Charlie Haughey, why would he have decided to make that change, and who's it benefiting? Like, what's the long-term plan? And because I can tell you one thing, it's not fucking working.
No.
Or it's working for somebody, but not for the citizens of Ireland.
When Charlie Haughey came in with O'Higgins, you look at Charlie Haughey and his powers and his actions. Charlie Haughey was in effect a mini dictator of the country, yeah, and he had control through his Secretary General of the other departments, particularly finance and a couple more. And that worked well. They had their beef tribunal, which was the initial restructuring. The initial restructuring was in the beef sector. Okay. And at the time, they didn't have many tools in what we call the toolbox. So it was very obvious the sort of restructuring that was taking place. They didn't have the right tools. So what they did then was they started trialing VAT fraud mechanisms in Monaghan poultry products back in, if I'm correct, it was 1994. It was just a few months before the beef tribunal report was issued. Okay. Yeah. So all of the description of the different things that were tried and tested in Monaghan poultry are contained in the judgment of Justice Shanley in Blemmings v. Patton in 1997. Okay? And that was a very important judgment where growers took the company to court over the overpricing and payments for their chicken, essentially. Now, the word VAT isn't mentioned once by Justice Shanley in the judgment. Anyone who understands the VAT fraud reads that document and VAT screams out all over it. Okay? So what it did was it gave the go-ahead for processors to inflate the price of feed. Yeah. And that became the base, and for them to determine that the grower had to use feed designated by the processor. Okay? So that allowed them to put in place the closed loop. Yeah, that was the first step. It allowed them to put in place. And at the same time, in order to make the closed loop work, all of the farmers in the poultry sector, who at that time were registered for VAT, they were required to deregister. They needed to deregister so that the VAT would be on their sales. It would be on the flat rate sales. Okay? The mechanism of fraud couldn't work without farmers being forced to deregister. So they forced them to deregister. Okay. So that was, Blemmings. And so very often you'll read that revenue will make a statement, or the IFA or whoever will make a statement, and they'll say it's in accordance with Irish law. Yeah. It's accordance with Irish law because they rely on Blemmings. They don't talk about European law, whether it's in accordance with European law, because obviously it's not. It's not in accordance with the VAT directive, which is why Pascal Donoghue had to remove the sector. So, when people tell you it's in accordance with Irish law, it's in accordance with the Patton, Blemmings v. Patton ruling, which, given that Justice Shanley never mentioned VAT at all, it would appear he wasn't aware of what was really involved in that case. But it was used afterwards, and it has been
as a test case for allowing them to do it.
Has been quoted by the IFA as a basis for the justification of the way that prices are pricing has been done in the chicken sector.
Okay, so I'll go back to my original question then. Are we, so you mentioned Charles Haughey and the way he was like, he fancied himself as a bit of a, I don't know, Libyan dictator, whatever. Mm-hmm. We don't, so I'm not looking at politicians now with yachts, or with their own island, or so with Charles you could kind of with Charles
That's right. But then you had the phone tapping incident 10 years after it had taken place on RTE primetime. You get, what was the minister at the time?
Brian Lenihan?
No.
Oh,
Doherty, isn't that his name? Who revealed the bombshell news that Haughey had been involved in the tapping of phones of journalists.
Yes.
Okay, so that moved Haughey out of his position as Taoiseach. And at the time, it was Albert Reynolds who was brought in, and Albert Reynolds was very close to the Beef Tribunal inquiry at that time and wasn't perhaps the strongest candidate. So he wouldn't have had the stature of Haughey coming in to the position of Taoiseach. Okay? So he was much more, let's say, understanding of his officials.
Right. Well, he would. So because he was involved in pet food, he was. I know.
Yeah.
He had.
Yeah.
Well, that was afterwards, was it? He was involved. Okay. So what you're saying about Albert Reynolds coming in, he was softer than Haughey.
He clearly happened the same. He's clearly happened the same standing as Haughey coming into his position.
And the reason you're saying that is because,
well, he had just gone through a difficult process in the Beef Tribunal, where he was the one who was sanctioning the refunds. What do you call them? Yeah, this is an area I haven't.
But what I'm saying is, if Haughey was there, he was the Gaddafi of Ireland. He's got his boat and he's got his island or whatever. He's got a big house and people are going housey space, and then he leaves because of the phone tapping, and then Reynolds comes in. What I'm trying to figure out is why this change was made by Haughey and why it hasn't been why we're still following this. Like, who's benefiting? Who enjoys this system? Because it doesn't seem to work for the citizens of the country.
Yeah, it's amazingly large, and there are very powerful vested interests involved in this.
I mean, there must be, because you're looking at, like, if you're looking at the Department of Revenue, looking at the Department of Justice, you're looking at the Department of Agriculture, looking at the Department of Enterprise, they all have to be in agreement for this to happen, because they're all breaking the law effectively.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying anything wrong. I'm saying that, clearly you've broken the law, but you're allowing each other to break the law, and you might be able to justify it by going, well, actually, this is, for enterprise and to allow agriculture to survive and to allow farmers to survive. But people don't do that. People don't work like that. They work if there's something in it for them.
Yeah, no, and I understand it. It's just, well, to be quite honest with you, I believe it's too dangerous to actually document it in an interview.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. I'm just saying things out loud that are occurring in my head. And
I could even give you the text of it. I can.
Let's not.
It's just too big.
Yeah.
Because there are too many people who stand to lose here, and very, very powerful people stand to lose.
So when I interview other people about, say, private care homes, iPass centres, tech startups being, taken down from the inside and tech being sold on, RTE with an agreement with Revenue, RTE being able to just like pay these bogus self-employed and then just like brush off the people who they didn't pay properly, and the Revenue's allowing this to happen. I'm looking for answers. You're looking for answers. We're looking for answers from the HSC. We're wondering why the building of a children's hospital is costing so much. We're wondering why the 3Ds are employed against families. We're wondering why the people of this country are feeling uncomfortable. They're not enjoying their lives. They're not able to afford a house. They're not able to afford, they're working. And you have to wonder who is benefiting, because they're being very clever, maybe because Haughey had a boat. And that was a bit kind of like, he just didn't care, and an island, and he was flaunting it. doesn't seem to be anybody flaunting, unless they're all wearing Italian leather shoes and we just haven't noticed yet. But you know what I mean? Like it's just, yeah.
It's a system of government. And the system of government moved from being under the control of the Taoiseach to being under the control of
The heads of
the highest
departments,
level of senior servants.
we're talking about civil servants running the country.
With the support of, let's say, security forces required in important people, enforcers.
I'm glad I don't live there anymore, having these conversations. Do you know what I mean? Because I've heard people say to me when they were looking at things, people who worked in the county council, and when they were talking about certain things, you'd say, "Oh yeah," and then I was stopped by the cops. They checked my my tax on my car. Like that happened to me 7 times in a month, and then revenue came to do my books like twice in 1 year, and you're calling, and I'm like, that's conspiracy theory shit.
No, it's not conspiracy theory. We recognize these things, and Alo Mohan, my colleague investigating all of these different things, we understand these things and we see them as fairly normal. We don't get excited by them. Like it's not nice that it's happening, etc. We know these things are happening. How many? Alo has had probably 10 different acts of violence or so against them, and
since Pascal announced this new the stopping of the fraud, he had his windows broken in his house a few days ago.
Totally predictable. I would have thought that it would have been worse than that, than what it was. I think it wasn't a major attack, but that there would be attack. Alo wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised. Why would you be surprised? It happens every time. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's actually, when it happens and keeps happening, it's not a theory.
Yeah, I know. Well, what I'm saying is when somebody said that to me, I was like, that you're imagining things or a coincidence. But now, but as time goes on, as I'm having these conversations, I'm like, okay. So then you're looking at, since this news came out, if you look at the Farmers Journal, they presented this news as there's some really disruptive fellas who've ruined it for all of us, and there's a load of chicken farmers or a load of farmers going to go out of business. Oh, thanks lads, you've ruined, like it's your fault. So what we do all the time in this country is when we have whistleblowers, either the Garda whistleblowers are the big ones, like you're looking at Tussler, you're looking at yourselves now. These guys are taken down by the media because so we're talking about this circle. We're talking about revenue, justice, agriculture, enterprise, media.
Yes, you're talking about coordination. You're talking about from the top down control by the state.
So then I have to imagine that, like, say for instance, I have to look at this as a layman and go, so are the opposition aware of this then as well, or like, because
there's no opposition.
But that's what I mean. Like, is there an opposition? Is it a democracy? What are the point? Who are we electing? Because when you look at what happens, you think, oh, there's a new government there, and you're going, oh, nothing's happening, nothing's changing. They're not being held to task. No heads are rolling. Nobody's in trouble. They're spending whatever they want. They don't care. There's headlines coming out there. They've been asked questions and they're just like, yeah, we'll just say whatever. And it's a bit of a show where people just walk up with their suits and their briefcase and they walk into Leinster House and then they put on the show, have a few drinks, go home. They're not making the decisions. They're not being lobbied. It's not even like we could say, well, it's big money, it's big oil or whatever in America where they're lobbying the president or whatever, and they're financing his. It's almost like backwards, or
it's a two-tiered system where people are beneficiaries of a system which they understand, at least their part to understand, and how it works, and it keeps working. And then you have the other people who are fed whatever lines they need to be fed, or whatever propaganda they need to be fed to keep them happy. And they go along through life and they never understand that the other tier even exists. Now, they might suspect, and maybe people make comments from time to time, but they're just opinions and sort of backlash, and again, it's conspiracy theory or whatever else. It doesn't get picked up. And even if it was picked up, how would you take it on? Who would you take on? If the whole apparatus,
if it's everything, if it's the whole structure, yeah.
So that's the situation. So people will say, well, now what will happen if Sinn Féin come to power? You know, the whole world will change and everything else. And you think, no, it won't. Not a lot.
So United Ireland might happen if it made economical sense for certain people or whatever like that. So decisions are based on like, well, does it benefit me? Can I control it? Will I make something out of it? Blah, blah, blah. It seems like it's not actually based on what people want or what the people of the country vote for, or it's to do with certain people.
If you look at the Farmers Journal, where they reported on this, the highest figure they've ever mentioned in their reports is the 5.1% VAT rate. So they never mentioned the 1,000% overclaim which revenue identified. Yet no one will talk about that. No one will say, well, it was clearly in breach of the EU VAT directive because we're overclaiming by 1,000% in the chicken sector. That's why it has to stop. But you never see that. And no one will tell you, how did revenue arrive at 1,000%? They simply looked at, well, there's this type of fraud here, there's this type of other fraud here, there's various frauds within the sector. Yeah, 3 main ones. And those 3, when you add them all together, come up to 1,000%. Okay? So revenue didn't arrive at that figure by pulling it out of thin air. Revenue arrived at 1,000% by piecing it together layer by layer and came out at 1,000%. Now, Alo and myself had told them for years that it was 750%. Now that was based on both carton figures in Alo and Cappoquin systems. So we knew what we were talking about when we put those calculations to them. What we left out was the extension of the VAT fraud into the breeder farms. So when breeder farms were brought into the VAT fraud system, then at that stage it took it up to the 1,000%. Okay, so. But you never get a report on the 1,000%, and you never get a report on how it was put together. But yet, Revenue sent a letter to Pascal Donoghue recommending that the broiler sector be removed from the flat rate system. So Pascal Donoghue knows, Michael McGrath before him knows, he had the same letter. And Michael McGrath was at the finance meeting where we explained about how this couldn't last, wouldn't last, needs to be planned for, and needs to be taken apart slowly. So, these people are aware of it. They know. What Michael McGrath did was he reported it to Revenue and to the Gardaí.
And that was the end of that.
Well, you might as well report it to the cat.
Well, the cat would probably do something about it. Well, at least the cat's not going to do anything about it. So what now? Like, so is this like, are you're fighting on a few different fronts, a few different things, personal, for justice, I suppose, for the people of Ireland. There's lots going on. Do you think that you've any chance of shaking this enough to destabilize it and for it all to come out and
needs to be planned for and needs to be taken apart slowly. So, these people are aware of it. They know. What Michael McGrath did was he reported it to Revenue and to the Gardaí.
And that was the end of that.
Well, you might as well report it to the cat.
Well, the cat would probably do something about it. Well, at least the cat's not going to do anything about it. So what now? Like, so is this like, are you're fighting on a few different fronts, a few different things, personal, for justice, I suppose, for the people of Ireland. There's lots going on. Do you think that you've any chance of shaking this enough to destabilize it and for it all to come out? And like, do you think that there's where do you see this going in an ideal world?
Well, I think the first thing you see is that they would never have taken out the broiler sector or the chicken sector out of the flat rate system, only they had to. Okay.
Right. Is it because are Europe aware of this now? No.
Oh, Europe wrote to them. We have a recent letter just last Friday, actually, from the head of DG Taxation, confirming that they've been in contact with Revenue and have been monitoring the situation since 2016, 2017, probably 2017, when Alo Mohan first went to the DG Taxation. Yeah. So Europe was on top of this, and
so it's stopping because Europe has said you can't do this anymore. It's against European law.
Yeah. So that's a start of it. I suppose another one, we were looking at the understatement of nitrogen in poultry litter, according to the Department of Agriculture. Up until 12 months or so ago, chickens had about 11 kilos of nitrogen per ton. Yeah. So in the north of Ireland, it was 28. Now, the department has since increased the content of nitrogen in Irish chicken litter from 11, I believe it's at 26. I can get that figure for you, but they've increased
from 11 to 26.
Yeah.
And this is chicken. This is being used as fertilizer.
But you see, when you quantify it as just 11 kilos, you can put a lot more onto your acre of land than when you classify it as 26. Yeah.
But nitrogen going into the land and into the water is fine, I presume.
Well,
that's not a problem.
Nitrates are carcinogenic to start with and extremely expensive to take out from water, so you don't do that. But
is that another thing that Europe are looking at, or you're just looking at that as another way of shaking the foundation?
Well, no, we're looking at that because we believe that's a very important one to look at. Like we know as well that Teagasc did a study that showed that it's not 11 and it's not 26, it's actually 36 kilos. Yeah. But if you did that, and if you classified it properly, then if you can only move on litter by spreading it on land, you would have to be covering the country with it. The cost of transport would be enormous to get it away from the growing areas to the tillage areas, because the growing areas are in areas of the country which are not big in tillage. Cavan Monaghan is not a big cereal growing area. Yeah.
Okay.
Which would lead you to question the strategic.
You'd imagine they would be better off with a factory down in Waterford.
That's if you're looking at disposing of chicken litter, yes, absolutely. So on that front as well, they've had to change. Yeah. So when you say we can't make a difference, I think we can. It's just how you go about making that difference.
But do you think there's any chance? I mean, because there's a nice group of whistleblowers. I don't know if you know any of the other whistleblowers, but there's a nice group of them, and they haven't gone away. They're still there. They're still working away. They're doing what they can. They're interested in a better Ireland, equality, fairness, transparency, all that kind of stuff. So do you think that the way the country has been run, do you think that can change anytime soon? Do you think people will get it and ask for change? Do you think there's can people power, if by me talking to you about it, if everybody in Ireland, say for instance, saw this interview, do you think people would suddenly go, oh, well, because what do? You're still, all you can do is vote. You can't. Yeah. And then we've got these immigration marches, which is just that's useful to the government, because it's well, that's great because everyone's looking over there. They're not even paying attention to what we're doing.
Yeah, I think when you look at legal action being taken by Alo Mohan against Revenue, you see that Revenue continue to stick to their position of nothing to see here, this case should be dismissed. Yeah. And keep coming back and making their arguments about process, not about substance, in each of the court hearings. There's no reporter there to report on any of these court sessions. There are no members of in the bigger hearings, there's no one there apart from Alo Mohan, his wife, and perhaps two of his colleagues. Yeah. So it didn't happen in effect. Nothing ever gets out there. Nothing ever gets discussed. But like the case for Revenue, when I look at it as a layperson, I see Pascal Donoghue having withdrawn the sector as simply pulling the rug from under Revenue because they have no case here. Yeah. They may not want to discuss the substance, but it's beginning to pass them out. It's beginning to overtake them, this situation. And I honestly don't know what Revenue is going to talk about in the next session. Like they seem to, it's not even that they're trying to put Genie back in the bottle. They don't even recognize that Genie has left the bottle. And Genie is dancing around the table here all over the place. And they're still trying to maintain their line that this case needs to be dismissed. Now,
so they're walking around. They're walking into these rooms for these meetings, thinking the genie's in their pocket in the bottle, and so. Do you think they've lost control? Do you think they're not as intelligent as they think they are?
I think the machine is going in a direction which is, whether they like it or not, reality is going to bring an end to this, because it's becoming untenable, their situation of standing up in court. And I don't know how long their senior counsel and junior counsel are going to be able to go in and continue speaking, because they cannot possibly believe what they're saying.
I'm gobsmacked.
And I don't believe a judge can preside over this anymore. And knowing what the evidence that has been provided now, I don't see how a judge stands over and say, yeah, there's nothing to see here. This is all perfect.
But what would be the result of a judge ruling in your favor? Are the people at the top of these departments going to have to be answerable? Are they just going to move people to Europe?
Yeah, well, you see, who makes them answerable? Who investigates them?
Well, we were on guard Cappoquin, I suppose.
Yeah, but who has clean hands here?
Well, yeah, because you can't investigate me because I know what you did. Are we in this sort of site?
It's one network. It's a model. It's a structure, an integrated structure, which works in its own way. The model of governance has worked very well since 1987 to now. It's been well managed. It's been cared for, protected, and there are certain cracks beginning to take place now. But who actually is in a position to take control over this at the moment? It's going to have to be the same people that are involved in the process that are going to have to fix the process. And some of them may be forced into it by interventions by the EU.
So Europe are a big hope, really, are they?
Well, Europe is very careful in how it does this. Europe has known about the Commission has known about this. DJ taxation has known about this for years. Yeah, but they're in a situation now where they appear to have an appetite to act. And an action has been taken against Greece lately, and they can't be seen to be acting against Greece and not act against Ireland. Yeah, so I think that's the level that change is going to occur at. It's not going to occur from within unless it's forced from outside. That's the way I would see it.
But so a very small percentage of the population of Ireland are benefiting hugely from some sort of system that's working for them, and they don't want to change it. Meanwhile, so that would answer all of the questions when it comes to employment, housing, infrastructure, healthcare system. None of those things really matter to the people who are making the decisions. To just it's not for the benefit of the citizens, because we seem to have a bit of money in this country. The problem for people living in this country is they're going, we seem to have a bit of money, but I'm stressed. I can barely afford the mortgage. This should be a good job. Both need to work. We barely see our children. We're just about getting by. This probably suits a certain type of society, or some, like, keep people busy. I don't know if you're going to get into that kind of like it's not conspiracy here, but way of running a country. Bread and circuses. Let them march. Let them, put on a load of festivals. Keep them entertained. Give them lots of booze, and we'll just do whatever we're doing up here. And they'll forget about the children's hospital at some stage. They'll forget about the fact the healthcare system doesn't work. They'll forget about the old person dying in the care home. It all seems, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit gobsmacked, and there's lots of things landing from you in my head at the moment,
Yeah. It takes a while to understand it and to appreciate it.
What would you say to people who would look at you and what you're saying and say, you're off your rocker? Sure, how can that be true? Sure couldn't. Actually, Ireland is the perfect size for something like that to work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's what happens immediately when you talk about things. So I don't generally talk about it because there's no market for what I have to say. People don't want to know, because the beneficiaries of this certainly don't want to know, because it's their system. And even the people who are employed by the beneficiaries, they don't really want to know too much about it either, because they're making a living. Look, it could be better, or the wish it was better and whatever else, but at least they are where they are. So there is no market there either for making changes or for upsetting the apple cart. So it's much easier to turn around and attack, let's say, Alo Mohan or myself.
The whistleblowers.
So why would we bother having a discussion with people that we know that they're going to act like that? It wouldn't be rational for us to bother getting involved at that level. Yeah. But at the moment, it's a bit different, which is why I don't mind talking now. The farmers are trying to work out why, in the poultry sector, why they've lost out here and what it's going to mean for them. Now, I kind of think of it in terms of a young kid who's got pain in their gums. Their gums are hurting. They don't know what's happening. They don't know that teeth are going to come out and it's all going to be wonderful and going to eat great things into the future. Yeah, they just know they're in pain. So what they're being told is the source of that pain with the farmers is actually the removal of the sector because of these bad people, particularly number one, Mr. Alo Mohan. They never say, it's the reality of the overclaim of 1,000% and the politicians supporting it and
revenue and
good detective who was supposed to be not investigating it, all of this stuff. None of that comes out at all. No one talks about that. No one talks about the involvement of the IFA in rolling out the systems. None of it. They all talk about the poor farmer who's getting robbed, but the farmer wasn't the beneficiary, but he will be the loser here. See, it's a beautiful system, the way it was put together. Like, you do have to admire how it was done. Yeah. So with speaking out at this stage, we can begin to explain to the farmers where the source of the pain is coming from and why they are in the position they are today. And they need to talk to the people who caused them the loss and who should be able to do something about making it up to them as we go forward. But talking to Alo Mohan or myself isn't going to sort our problems out. Blaming us is like blaming the weather. Like, it's a useless starting point. So after they finished listening to useless explanations from the farming press, and from politicians, reality will kick in when bills become harder to pay because they've been cut back in price, their volumes get reduced, their income has been slashed, but they still have to make the repayments on the growing houses for the chickens.
But also, if you apply a bit of logic to this, right? Two lads, just like yourself and Alo, you don't have the power to make something that's happening that's ultimately good for an industry like the farming industry. You don't have the power to make the Department of Agriculture stop, or the Department of Finance stop doing that. If it's good for the farmers, you don't have that power. The only reason you were able to get it to stop is because it's not benefiting and it's a fraud and it's illegal. Like, people just need to apply a bit of logic here. Like, two lads who are businessmen don't have that power. So apply a bit of logic and think a bit more. Think beyond the headline. Think beyond what you're being told, and you'll come up with the conclusion that, of course, two family men or two businessmen who just happen to meet, through whatever shared interest, they wouldn't have that power. It must be somebody else is doing something wrong, and who is that?
That's right. And they have to recognize that the situation was illegal. You see, at the moment, the press talks about loopholes. It's not a loophole. It's simply fraud. So we need to get to the stage of actually defining what it is. And we need to point to the tax authorities, to revenue, who undertook its study and who found an overclaim of 1,000%.
Yeah,
that's not Alo Mohan. That's not me. It's just 1,000%. And rates of overclaim of 1,000% are not sustainable indefinitely. And any responsible government has to be thinking of terms of, what do we do after this collapses? How do we prepare for it? Now, Alo and myself did advise that course of action. We shouldn't be advising that course of action. That should be coming from the statesmen, men and women running the country. It shouldn't be coming from us. We're actually the victims, the losers financially of the fraud, but we were the ones arguing that it needed to be taken apart in a responsible way, because 1,000% cannot be sustained. And I think anyone can understand that you cannot overclaim by 1,000% indefinitely.
Well, look at I feel like I thought we talked for about 30 minutes. It's now an hour and 20 minutes, and I still haven't finished. I feel like I could still keep talking. I'm sure we'll talk again. And like, my mind is blown, so I don't even know.
You see, I'd have to go back over all of the stuff I've written. I've all this written up, right? I've kind of parked that. The last time I would have read anything about the Haughey era and all that stuff was back in, I think my modules are in 2023. So if we were going to talk about that topic, I'd have to refresh myself.
Well, you come back to me whenever you're ready to talk about another topic. And
but do you see how dangerous it is?
Yes.
Because you're talking about accountancy firms who have to sign off on all of this stuff. Yeah. You're talking about auditors that sign off on all of this stuff.
Yeah.
You're talking about legal firms that are involved in structuring and all sorts of arrangements here. So